Well, welcome to our Tuesday night live Bible study. Man, I'm glad to be back with you. As I said when I was teasing this, that I've been gone for nearly a month. I left Denver, headed east, and came back to Denver, headed east. I circled the globe, and then since then I've done another meeting in Texas. So anyway, it's great for me to be back, but I heard nothing but good reports about all of the people who spoke, and man, it's great. For those of you that are new, let me just real quickly say that this is a live Bible study. We're live streaming it, and we want you to interact. We would love to hear from you. You can text us questions. The format is basically that we're going to talk for around 20 or 25 minutes about current events and just a lot of things here. We'll be announcing that in a minute. But we want to take your calls. And we've got with us David Barton tonight. Man, he's a great man, a good friend, and I tell you, I am just so excited about the way he's standing up for things, and the history is being rewritten. Our nation is being fundamentally changed, and it's because people don't know where we've come from. They are buying lies about this. We're going to be dealing with a lot of things, and I tell you, this is going to generate a lot of questions. Let me just real quickly mention that we've got people watching in Texas, Wisconsin, Indiana, Florida, Kansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Ohio, New York, Illinois, Colorado, New Jersey, Iowa, and they're also in Canada, New Zealand, Nigeria, the Bahamas, UK, Paraguay, Ghana, the Philippines, and Argentina. And so, man, welcome. We have somewhere around anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people that usually participate in this, and so we're glad that you're with us. Real quickly, let me say that if you want to text us, you just there is a place that you can chat with us on any of these formats that you're watching and send us your questions. We also have my phone center is open right now, and that's at 719-635-1111. And if you have something that you want to get an explanation, if you want to talk to someone and say, well, what material does Andrew have that would cover this? The people will interact with you. They will pray with you. They'll help you any way they can, and they have a lot of information. That number is 719-635-1111. And if you send us a text or if you ask for the notes from this, we will be typing up notes and giving you some information so that you can go back through this. We will send that to you, and that automatically enters you into we're going to choose one person to give you a book. This week's book is my newest book on excellence, how to pursue an excellent spirit. We'll be giving this away to a person. And last week we had Pastor Lawson Perdue on, and they had his book on Hebrews, The Better Covenant, and the winner of that was Christine Lewis. So we'll be sending that out pretty soon. You can also give. You can call our helpline, 719-635-1111. You can go to awmi.net/give. Or you can, if you're watching live streaming, there's a place there that you can click give, and you can be a part of that. Let me see what else I've got here. David Barton's contact information is wallbuilders.com. And I know that you're going to be blessed tonight. This will be awesome. So we've already got some questions coming in. But first of all, David, we just want to get into talking about how a Christian should be responding to all of the things that are happening. And I've heard you say these things. I just want to lead you into it. But why is our nation going the direction, and what can we as believers do about it?
Our nation's going the direction because of believers, and what we as believers can do is stop it if we ever decide to. And so it really is in our camp. And let me kind of put a perspective on that. Go to the book of Genesis. It's called the seed plot of the Bible. Every major teaching of the Bible you'll find in Genesis somehow, some way, some shape. And so when you look at God's creation, 6 days He creates everything, it's interesting that what we've been taught for 1,000 years in the Christian church is, why was man created? He was created to glorify God. Time out. He had tons of angels already doing that. He can create as many as he wanted to glorify God. When he threw Lucifer out with a third of the angels, they were glorifying God till they rebelled. He's got no shortage of beings to glorify Him. What you find in Genesis 2:5 and 2:15, it says, God looked and He had no one to tend the garden. So He said, I'll create man. He put man here to take care of earth, to take care of what He's put here. It's not to get off earth and find somewhere else and glorify God for it. That'll come. What we're put here to do is to tend the garden.
He gave us dominion.
He gave us dominion. He said, subdue it. He said, all of this I've just created, you take, you subdue, this is yours. And so that's the purpose we're here. Now, at this point, we have yet as the Christian community to adopt that mentality that says, what Jesus said, occupy till I come, Luke 19:3. And so we have yet to get that occupation mentality. And I don't want this to sound wrong, but it's in the sense of, if you look at World War II when it ended, dropped the 2 atomic bombs in Japan, and then you have an occupation force that goes in, and General Douglas MacArthur led the occupation force. In 7 years, he so rebuilt that nation, rebuilt their economy, their thinking. He rebuilt their military in a different direction, their form of government. In 7 years, Japan was such a different nation that they were welcomed fully back into the community of world nations. Now, that's occupation. You go in, you change the education system. You guys have been teaching suicide bombers from the age of 16. We're not doing that anymore. You change the political system. You change the religious system. That's the 7 mountains.
And contrast that with some of our modern wars where we go in and have a great loss of life, lots of money, but then we just withdraw and leave them on their own. And how's that worked?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I do at military bases is I teach courses on military ethics. And as you look at military conflicts from Bible forward, you know, way back there with the birth of Israel, coming out of Egypt and taking on Pharaoh, as you look at their coming forward, you have 2 types of enemies. You have those that have similar values and those that have dissimilar values. When we fought the American Revolution, the British had similar values to us. When we fought in Vietnam, we're fighting dissimilar values. And any time you fight a war with similar values or dissimilar, the things you have to do is you have to break the enemy's ability to fight and break their will to fight. And what we've been doing since Vietnam is we break their ability, but not their will.
Did you know, along those lines, I just read something on the internet yesterday that they interviewed the general who South Vietnam surrendered to. They had a picture of when that happened, April the 30th, I think, 1975. And this North Vietnamese general said the reason they won, even though they lost over 1 million lives, and we lost like, what was it?
60,000.
Yeah, but I mean, that was terrible, but they lost 1 million.
Oh, and they kept going.
And he said the reason they won was because, and he mentioned Jane Fonda by name, he mentioned these people, and he said it was the anti-war protest at home that broke the will of the Americans.
Our will to fight.
And he says that's the reason they won, even though they were losing people 10-1 in this battle, because people did not stand up and fight. Instead, they were actually fighting against these things.
And so we get to this thing as Christians where we think everything is supposed to be civilized, and that if we get engaged politically, they're going to treat us nice. They're not going to say bad things about us. I'm sorry.
I know, that's foolish.
And what happens is our guys don't like to get beat up on. They don't like to get chewed on. They don't like to have all the negative stuff. They don't like to see themselves in social media being chewed out for what they've done. They don't like fake news being made about them. I did an interview with a guy the other day in Illinois, and I get ambushed all the time. But this was a key ambush. He absolutely made up quotes that have never before appeared in the history of the internet, and on TV started popping these quotes at me. And it's like, I got a shock factor here because I've never heard this in my life. It's been made, but I mean, it's such unfair tactics, but you say, that's all right, I know who wins.
That's like accusing somebody of running for office of being sexually, harassing them 35 years ago, and it's just an accusation as far as we know. No proof for it at all. This question, which we are going to talk some more before we take the rest of these questions, but I thought this was so appropriate. Basically, this Ruthie is saying that the biblical model says that things are going to get worse, that there's going to be a great falling away and stuff. And so what's the use? Should we even be involved in this, or should we just let things play out?
I've got 2 answers to that. One's historical, one's biblical. The historical is, and it's part biblical, I believe that the Bible is God's inspired, inerrant, infallible word. I believe it's 100% true all the time, everything it says. Okay, I believe that, and I will point out that Paul and Peter and the Apostle John all said that they were living in the last days. They thought Jesus would come back in their generation. Now, I believe that they were living in the last days, but what's that tell me? It tells me the last days last at least 2,000 years.
Right.
So I don't know how long the last, and I don't know when the end of the last days is. It may be another 40,000 years. It may be 40 seconds. Maybe the part of that transmission was part of the preparation for second. Who knows? I'm not going to speculate on that, but I do know that every generation since Christ was on earth thought he would return in their generation. And what if they had done nothing? What if they had said, it's all prophesied, that where would we be? Yeah. We wouldn't be the recipients of anything.
One thing, we'd be speaking German.
Well, German and British and everything else. The second thing I'll point out is, if you look at Ahab, a very wicked king, God decreed judgment on Ahab, and Ahab got down in sackcloth and ashes. And God called Elijah and said, "Do you see how he repented? I'm going to bless him." And then you have Hezekiah, a good king, who does something really stupid, and God says, "That's it. You have 15 years. That's the end of it." And Hezekiah gets down, humbles himself. God says, "All right, I'll give you another 50, extended his years." Mm-hmm. And so what we do know is, I don't care when the end of days happen, I know that if you pray and get involved, God will change His plans over us praying and exercising that faith. And that's what the Bible teaches. Just because it's prophesied doesn't mean it's going to come to pass right then or right now. He may put it off like He did with Hezekiah, an extra 15 years.
And even if this is the end times, I'm not going to help the Antichrist. I'm going to resist him every step of the way. I'm going to fight evil. The Bible says the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, and I am not going to cooperate with it and sit idly by it.
Well, and on top of that, Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commandments. My disciples keep my commandments." He said, "Occupy till I come." He said, "You be salt and earth. You be the preservative." We're told in Proverbs 22:21, the wise man attacks the city of the wicked. We're supposed to be on the offense, and this stuff of waiting for him to come, that's defense, and that's not what wins. Defense never wins. Offense
I have had some people say, but Paul didn't ever, protest the Roman government. He didn't do all of this kind of stuff. My answer to that would be that he didn't have the blessing of a democracy or a republic the way that we do. His nation wasn't conceived by Christians with godly foundations and given a right to redress things. And so this is your area of expertise. This nation is different.
We have a different nation. There are 7 different forms of government mentioned in the Bible. And that was a very authoritative form of government, which you could call it an oligarchy, because there was a little council of 70 senators with the Romans, or you call it a dictatorship, totalitarian, whatever it was. We've been blessed with a government where that we own it. Mm-hmm. We're the stewards of that government. And we know from all these passages in the Bible that government is ordained of God. So whether you want to go to Titus, whether you want to go to Romans, whether you want to go to 1 Peter or Jude, it's God's. So what did God ordain here in America? Self-government. God said, "Here's the government, guys. You take care of it till I get back." So we're not in position of Paul, but I will point out that Paul, when he got in trouble, was an expert in the Roman Constitution. They have him stretched out about to whip, and he said, "Are you sure you can do this to a Roman citizen?"
That's a good point.
See, he knew that Constitution, and he used that, and he appealed to Caesar when they were going to kill him early, which got him to Rome.
He did demand his rights.
He demanded his rights as a Roman citizen, and even the centurion said, "I had to pay a lot to be a Roman citizen." Paul said, "Not me. I was born a Roman citizen." He had rights, and he exercised them. And so there's times when he's Paul the Roman citizen, there's times when he's Paul the apostle of Christ. And he worked in both worlds, and he exercised authority under the Roman Constitution and got a lot of stuff done as a result.
So we are the ones who have these liberties, and all of these politicians and stuff work for us. And when a person doesn't stand up, in a sense, we can't blame them for our lack of involvement.
Well, you can't blame them, and the easy way of I'll just go to a guy that was the 20th President of the United States. And by the way, he was a minister of the gospel. He was in the Second Great Awakening. He was James A. Garfield. He's a preacher. Most folks don't know that we had a preacher, and yes, we had preachers present. And he's 1876, on the 100th anniversary of America, of the Declaration of Independence, he made a statement that is still true today. He said, "Now, more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress." He said, "If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it's because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. Mm-hmm. If that body be intelligent, brave, and pure, it's because the people demand these high qualities." Now here we are today. Since 1980, only 1 out of 6 American adults chooses the President of the United States. Since 1980, only 1 out of 8 American adults chooses our governors and our senators and our reps. And only 1 out of 50 American adults chooses our mayors. So if we think government's going the wrong direction, look in the mirror.
Yeah.
That's all it is, because this is a government. God said, "Here, you guys take care of it. I'll come back later."
And this leads us to something that, a lot of Christians, it was the evangelical vote that got Trump elected. And I mean, we dodged a bullet. I don't know what
we got a
happened.
reprieve.
We did. But some people think, well, we've already done our part. But you and I were talking about this earlier. The midterm elections are going to be crucial, and this low voter turnout in presidential election years actually gives us an opportunity to have an impact, a disproportionate impact. And the Democrats are going to stand up because they are so upset at Trump. So we need to do something.
That's right. What happens in a non-presidential election year? In a presidential election year, you average about 54% of voters vote. In a non-presidential year, it's down to 39%, which means your vote counts about 25% more than it would in a presidential year because fewer people vote, so you have more influence. But as you pointed out, the other side is so animated. And let me be real clear here. I'm not saying that Trump is the moral guy and there was a lot of Christians who couldn't vote for him. All right, great. I think the best example, the best analogy I've ever heard of this election was given by my son Tim. He said, we have a choice here between Samson and Jezebel. Now, Samson wasn't a godly guy, but he fought his tail off for God's people.
That's right.
And he did the right thing for God's people, and Jezebel was killing God's prophets. In other words, opposed to what God stood for. So under Trump, we have signed the first pro-life law in 14 years. We have several dozen pro-life measures that went through, including yesterday at the Department of Agriculture, another pro-life measure, pro-conscience measure. We have 160 judicial vacancies. He's appointed over 80 now. And there's a hearing tomorrow on one of my friends who's going to be on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The kind of people he's put in office, the kind of people I work with on religious liberties. And we have, for the first time in 100 years, his cabinet is having a Bible study on maturity in Christ. A weekly Bible study at the cabinet level. Now, who's hearing all that? Okay, I'll say Trump wasn't the moral guy. He was not my first choice. But I will tell you,
he wasn't my first choice.
He has fought for God's people. And we have a reprieve here. But the other side is adamantly angry over what's happened. And so what we've already seen in the early elections this year is they have turned out in huge numbers. And if Christians sit back and say, well, we won the presidency, so we're okay for 4 years, we will get our head handed to us in the midterms.
And Trump has to have them in order to get legislation. He can sign executive orders, but a liberal president can come in and undo everything.
But the cool thing about him, and this has been a shocker to me, his executive orders that he signed have not been, as President Obama's were, policy making. He has said, I'm the president. I can't make laws. I can only tell my executive branches to do this. So he told, for example, the IRS to stop persecuting churches when they have political speech in them. Well, he can't change the law, but he can deal with his agency. Mm-hmm. Now, President Obama was making laws, and he said, in DACA, for example, he said, I don't have the constitutional authority, but with my phone and my pen, I'm telling you, you will not do this with immigrants, and you will not do this. And under President Obama, I run an organization where we deal with persecuted Christians in the Middle East. We've helped over 50,000. We've moved over 10,000 persecuted Christians out of ISIS way. We cannot bring them to America because America does not accept Christians. We accepted all sorts of Syrian refugees, but not Christians.
We don't profile.
But yeah, right. But we did.
We
but
profile now, against the
under
Christians.
President Trump, we are now accepting more Christians than we are Syrian refugees. And under President Trump, we are now giving direct aid to the genocide going on in the Middle East. Now, that makes a lot of people mad. It makes Christians happy if you know about it. Media's not talking much about it. So what we've got right now is if you do not give a Senate, then you're not going to get any more judges. If another Supreme Court nomination comes open, right now we had Gorsuch, and Gorsuch has been such a godsend. He's been such a godly guy on the Supreme Court. But all he did was replace Scalia. We haven't made any gains on the Supreme Court. We just haven't lost anything. But we think at the end of this term there will be one vacancy. And if he does not have a Senate, then it doesn't matter who he chooses. We're not going to confirm it. They're not going to confirm it. And the other 80 vacancies that we have in federal judges right now, not going to confirm it. And the other appointments, there's about 4,300 what we call Schedule C appointments. The president gets to make about 4,300. They won't confirm them. And we won't be getting pro-life people in, and we won't be getting godly people in, and we won't be having cabinet Bible studies from the Church of Christ because we won't be having those kind of cabinet members. So this is a big deal coming up.
So you and I were together at another person that was running for president on the Republican side, and I think that he was our first choice, even though Trump wasn't my first choice. In retrospect, I believe that Trump has done things that the others would not have done. Trump doesn't care what people say about him, and the others would have caved.
If our religious guys had done this, they would be screaming theocracy to high heaven.
Yeah.
And our whole side would be back, oh, it's not a theocracy. No, we didn't mean to have prayer before the inauguration. And so he walks out, and he's perceived to be a pagan, and he has 6 people pray at the inauguration, and 4 of them pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Not in my lifetime, and actually not in history, if we had 6 prayers at inauguration. Now, if our guys had done that, they would have got their heads beat in.
Well, let me ask you a question. Here's another question comes in from Denise, and she says, what does David Barton think about revival coming again to this nation under our current president, Donald Trump? I am excited again for the soon coming Great Awakening. What do you think?
It's not going to happen.
What do you think?
Not that way. Now, here's how it happens. I believe we're in a revival right now. But here's the thing to know. You look at the revivals in our history, the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, Third Great Awakening. Did you know that nobody knew they were in a revival till decades later when historians wrote about it and said that was a revival?
Yep.
So when it was happening, George Whitefield didn't know he was in a revival, and it was a lot of hard work what he did. It was not easy for him to preach 18,000 times, and he rode a horse 7 times across the nation. 80% of people who lived in America physically heard him preach a sermon. That's a lot of work. He died from preaching. The last 2 years he would preach and then go spit up blood and cough and retch his guts out and get his horse and ride. It's not easy. Revival is always hard work. And in the Bible, whether it's under Josiah, Jehoshaphat, or any of those revivals that you want to point to, Asa, they're hard work. So what you find is a revival, and here's the other part, they always include lots of opposition. Revivals have never been easy. Whitefield got his, how do I want to say this? He was attacked viciously all the time, and it was by religious leaders. Yeah. Revivals always set the church against the revivalist. And the church says, oh, we've never done it that way before. Mm-hmm. Why is it that Whitefield had to preach outside for all his meetings? Because pastors wouldn't let him come in their churches. He was rejected by the religious community. Matter of fact, pastors told their parishioners, see him out in that pasture? You climb up in the trees over him and pee on him and defecate on him. That's what pastors told their parishioners to do to Whitefield.
Wow.
Now, you take Charles Finney, the same thing with the Second Great Awakening.
Let me just say that this is not just an opinion, but David has some of these, the largest private collection of original documents. I bet you've got stuff that verify all of the stuff you're saying.
Yeah, all of this is easily, historically documentable. We have the actual original documents that back this up. And revivals are wonderful. And I believe we're in a revival.
I do too.
But it is a lot of hard work. It will be the church turning on itself. Did you know right now in America, 72% of Christian pastors say they do not believe the Bible. So if a Christian pastor stands up and believes the Bible, 72% of Christian pastors are going to attack him. Wow. So how much backbone do you have? That's a revival. But see, here's the good deal. Take the American Revolution. The American Revolution, we're an independent nation. 25% of Americans supported independence, 25% opposed independence, 50% didn't care if it didn't affect them. So only 25% supported independence, but only 8% of the nation ever got involved in the American Revolution. We won the revolution with 8% of the nation. We don't have to have 100%. We don't have to have 51%. We got to have a dedicated 8%. And that's what a revival is. It's the Whitefields and the Finneys and the D.L. Moody's and all these guys, Seymour, getting out there and doing things and getting their brains beaten in by religious community.
And you know, I believe that our media today is so misrepresenting things that, just like you say, I believe we're in a great revival, but we aren't going to hear it through the media.
No.
But there are indications, such as the kneeling at the national anthem, and the NFL is taking a beating.
Look at people stand up, yeah.
I heard that the NFL Monday Night Football was the lowest viewership in the history.
It's costing them billions on this.
And why? Because there are people out there who do have proper values and who do honor the Lord and this country.
Well, look at it. The new CEO for Starbucks said, conservatives, come back. If you're a veteran, we want you to come. They'd been so anti-American, and people just, Starbucks, I mean, that was the big ticket stock item if you could get it 5 years ago. And now, man, they are so far down in the tank. There is something going on with the people.
So here's another question for you that came in. And if you'd like to give a question, you can go on Facebook Live and type in a question there. Or if you're on chat or on, I don't know how all this stuff works. But anyway, you should know how to do this. Send us a question. But here's another question. It says, David, could you comment on the Black Robe Regiment, pastors that led their churches in battle against the American Revolution? Again, this is speaking to the fact that a lot of people think Christians should get out of this. It's dirty and withdraw from it. What's the story?
The Black Robe Regiment, that's what the British called the pastors, because pastors in the American founding wore black clerical robes. Whether you're Catholic or Protestant, whether you're black pastor or white pastor, you wear a black robe. And the British said if it hadn't been for that Black Robe Regiment, America would still be a happy British colony. And so you find that the pastors were the military leaders. They were the political leaders. They wrote many state constitutions. When we ratified the Constitution in several states, they were ratified in churches, not in state legislatures. You'll find that the pastors, until Civil War, 91% of colleges and universities in America had a pastor as the president of the university. Educate all 7 mountains. And today, man, the church is saying, man, I got 2 foot square behind the pulpit and I'm not leaving that. That's not how you take the 7 mountains. You got to go attack those things. And that's what the Black Robe Regiment used to do, so much so that when the British came to New York City and landed in 1777, there were 19 churches in New York City. The British burned 10 of them to the ground and desecrated the other 9. They went across Maine burning churches, went across New Jersey burning churches, went across Virginia burning churches. They're not going to do that today because we're not a threat to them.
And
back then we were.
Who was the British general that said we would have won if it hadn't been for the Black
Peter
Robe?
Oliver was the British official that talked about if it hadn't been for that Black Robe Regiment, and that's where the name came from, was
And so the
those
British
black robes.
credited the success
The preachers.
of the revolution to the preachers. Man, we got a bunch of questions here that are right down your alley. It says, what do you see happening in America over the next 3 years?
It depends on the church. I see a lot of good stuff happening. I believe we're in a revival, therefore I believe things are happening. And while things are not going well in the millennial generation, as far as statistics show, I find that they're the easiest generation to turn back in the direction of truth. And so in summer, we take 50 young people at a time, 18 to 25. We get them in, and they come in with typical millennial polling. 2 weeks later, they go out as warriors, boy, and they're tearing it up. And I mean, even now, we check with them across the months, and what they're doing in the country is so cool right now. I look and I see that a 17-year-old gets elected to the state legislature in West Virginia. Couldn't even vote for herself. She wasn't old enough to vote yet. And then I see a youth pastor in New Hampshire.
Now, did this happen recently?
It happened recently.
I hadn't heard about
She was 18 when she got sworn in, but I can point to 2 others in the West Virginia legislature. They're under 25. Point to a youth pastor up in New Hampshire under 25 who's a legislator up there. I can just take you across the nation, show you these millennials that don't look good on polling. There's something happening in them.
That's good news.
Going
I'm
in the
sure
right
the
direction.
people watching this are excited to hear this.
Yeah, there's
Man,
good stuff.
There's good things happening.
There's good stuff.
All right, here's another question. Can Andrew and David tell me their perspective on all these killings, guns? Is this biblical?
Well, yes, and here's the reason why. Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration, he's called the father of public school, son of the Constitution. He said, if you ever take the Bible out of schools, you'll spend all of your time and money fighting crime when you could prevent crime in the classroom. Yeah. Jesus tells us that murder and all crime comes out of the heart. So if you can't control the heart, you can't control behavior. So they're saying gun control. Let me take you back. Before we had guns, we had Cain who picks up a rock and clubs his brother Abel. You know, if Congress would have passed rock control laws back then, we wouldn't have had that problem. No, Cain's heart is good. I can kill you with a can of green beans if I don't like you. I'll pick it up, you know.
I tell people that guns don't kill people any more than forks make people fat.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Man, that's awesome. So anyway, let's see. Here was another question. Let's see if the
and by the way, can I point out
yeah,
something?
Go ahead.
In the last 10 years, we've had 14 church shootings, mass shootings at churches. We've had also the Las Vegas shooting. We've had over 50 mass shootings in the last 15 or so years. Not a single one was undertaken by a Bible-believing Christian.
That's true. I just wrote a blog on this, and I said people are saying that we've got a mental health crisis. We need to start regulating guns, and they point to all these things. The problem is it's evil, and we've lost the fear of God. Psalms 36:1 says, the transgression of the wicked says within my heart that there's no fear of God.
That's right.
And the reason that Devin Kelly killed these people is because he didn't have a fear of God. And it's the responsibility of the believers. It's not Congress making more gun. You couldn't make enough laws.
Well, China does not have guns, but they have mass murders of knives and machetes. So they don't have gun problems, but they have mass murders of knives and machetes.
I was just in England, and they don't have guns, but they had somebody walk in and kill a bunch of people with guns.
Well, I was just in Chicago. They don't have guns, and they get 70 people killed every weekend or whatever it is.
It's not working.
They've got the cities with the highest gun control laws also have the highest murder rates right now.
All right, here's another question. Your thoughts on Judge Roy Moore?
I have known Roy Moore for a number of years. And I don't know whether anything happened 35 or 40 years ago, but if it did, it happened 35 or 40 years ago. In the last 40 years, he's been elected statewide several times. There has been no hint of any kind of immorality or scandal. I don't know what the truth is, but I like what George Bush said when he ran for president. He said, you know, when I was young and stupid, I did young and stupid things. But he had a change. He had a change in his life. And Roy Moore, we've seen nothing for 40 years. So I don't know what happened back then, but I know his record, elected statewide, Chief Justice elected on the court, clean record all the way through.
And he has really been a strong conservative.
He is unequivocal in his position for God and for morality and for marriage and for everything else. Biblical, he's very strong. So who knows what the truth is back then, but I will tell you that for 40 years you don't have that record.
Here's another question from Debbie. It says, David, will you honor us with a brief review of George Washington's faith and courage for the Lord? And let me just add one other statement to that. I was with a pastor recently who said, America, you know, make America great again. America has never been great. Mm-hmm. George Washington would pray and say all these things and then go home and beat his slaves. And because of that, he has rejected anything good about George Washington.
You know, here's what we do with it, because let me back up. We know this kind of stuff comes out of universities all the time. We see it. I'm very much involved in the university scene, and so is Tim. And so as these millennials come in, and we have them in the summer, every 2 weeks we get a new crop in, we know what they're getting taught by the professors. And the best way to inoculate them is we give them 7 questions to ask your professor. So when a pastor says to me, he went home and beat his slaves, my first question is, wow, what's the proof of that? Show me a source on that. Well, I found it over here in the Huffington Post. Oh, great! That's really. So you start asking questions. Now, the short summary of Washington's faith is strong Christian. End of story. That's all there is. Now, well, that's not what I've heard. I know that's not what you've heard. Go back to the originals. George Washington's first set of writings came out in 1832 by Jared Sparks, the chaplain of Congress, who collected his writings, 12 volumes. In volume 12, he said, I want to know about Washington's faith. So he went to the people who knew Washington. He went to his daughter who lived with him 20 years in Mount Vernon. Nellie, actually his adopted daughter, his granddaughter that he adopted as a daughter. She said, you might as well question his patriotism as to question his faith. And she talked about how that her aunt died at Mount Vernon. And George didn't realize she was dead yet. And George went over and laid hands on her and prayed for God to heal her. And she was dead. And George, why would a deist go pray for God to raise someone up? And so when you look at the eyewitnesses, but what happened in 1987, an academic came out with the same writings of Washington. He took out all the eyewitness testimony and he said, George Washington's a deist. How about all the eyewitnesses? So this is what we fight with academia today. Their opinions are worth more to them than actual truth and reality and eyewitnesses are.
And I've heard you answer a lot of these questions, but Jefferson, they claim that he rewrote the Bible and took out all his stuff, and explain that.
Well, yeah, Jefferson, and first off, people aren't going to listen to me talk about Jefferson because he's such a wicked slave owner who had, he impregnated Sally Hemings and had all of his children. All right, time out. Why is it that up until just a few years ago, black civil rights leaders were the one who praised Jefferson more than any other? And you can start with Benjamin Banneker, black civil rights leader in the 1790s. You can go all the way through Frederick Douglass in the early 1800s. You go through Henry Highland Garnett in the 1860s. You go through all the way to MLK. And it's because Jefferson fought slavery vehemently, but his own state would not allow him to free his own slaves. So he tried to end slavery. Do you know Jefferson in 1784 introduced a national law to end slavery, and it failed by 1 vote? And he wrote, oh, that God would have changed one heart. We could end it. He wanted to end slavery, but his state would not let him free his own slaves. So first, let's get that off the table. Now, did he create a Bible?
That's something I've never heard before.
We don't hear that. But that's why black civil rights leaders used to praise Jefferson, because he went to the mat. He introduced state laws to get slavery ended. He introduced national laws to get slavery ended. He worked in Europe to get slavery ended. He worked 60 years to get slavery ended, and we don't get that. And he did not create a Bible in which he cut out all the stuff. As a matter of fact, our book, Jefferson Lies, goes through these lies. What he did, if you look at what's called the Jefferson Bible, it has healing the sick and raising the dead and casting out demons, and Jesus is the Son of God. And I thought it didn't have miraculous. I ask this all the time. People tell me that. Have you ever read it? No, but that's what everybody says. Great, go read it yourself. So there's an 1804 version, 1820 version. The 1804 version has miracles all over it. 1820 version has a lot of supernatural stuff in it, but what Jefferson said was, I have chosen 81 moral teachings of Jesus. And if you will live by the moral teachings of Jesus, we'll need less government. So he wasn't after the miracles, he was after the teachings.
He just gave an abbreviated teaching for the simplicity, so make it more available.
On this one, you get the teachings of Jesus, and there's lots of miracles. On this one, you get the morals of Jesus.
So we're running out of time here, but let me ask you this question. I know some of these people are saying, but they own slaves. And to some people, that right there makes them immoral and ungodly. How do you justify this?
Let me take several. Abby Johnson. A lot of people in the pro-life community know her. And if I go down to the Heidi group down in Texas, Carol Everett, and I can go through lots of names, and there's no way those women can be pro-life because they had an abortion. That's stupid. They had an abortion. They don't have abortions anymore. Now they're the leading pro-life leaders. So you look at the signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 of them owned slaves. Yep, they sure did, because Great Britain would not let us end slavery. After we separated from Great Britain, you look at how many founding fathers released their slaves, freed their slaves, and then started anti-slavery societies. So today we say, you own slaves. There's no way you can be good. No, that's like saying because you had an abortion, you can never be a pro-life
So
advocate.
many of them grew up in this system. Well, and I heard Tim, your son, say this. He says, you name me one country in the world that didn't have slaves
that's right.
in it at that time.
And you name me one country in the world where the whites went to war against whites to free blacks. Only America. We're special. Now, we had slavery. Interestingly, in 1773, 1774, a bunch of the founding father states tried to end slavery, anti-slavery laws. King George III struck it all down. That's when founding fathers started saying, well, let's separate from Great Britain so we can end slavery. And so in 1776, after we separate from Great Britain, that's when you find them pass the anti-slavery laws.
And I also know from you that when the colonies did form and declare independence, that slavery was a big issue, and many of them wanted to outlaw it, but it was just that they had to win this revolution first, and in order to do it, they had to incorporate some of the
And did you know that in
states.
Massachusetts there never was a time when blacks could not vote, and that there were a number of states that didn't have, and as a matter of fact, in New York, they were a slaveholding state, and the largest slaveholder in New York had 6 slaves. They had slaves, but just a handful. Now, I'm not justifying slavery, but it's not. See, what happens is we look at the image of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and say all of them were like that. No, no, no. There were a few slaves in the North.
There were terrible things done through slavery, but
slavery's bad, period.
But from the beginning, people fought to end it. And last thing, I just want you to comment on this, that they they considered a slave 2/3 of a person, and people say
3/5.
3/5.
3/5.
And they say that that's the value that they placed on a black person. Explain what happened.
The founding fathers only thought blacks were 3/5, and they wrote that in the Constitution. Now, and by the way, let me be clear on my previous comments because I went through it fast. I don't justify slavery in any way, shape, fashion, or form. It's wrong. But the way we portray it today in the founding fathers, that because they owned slaves, they were all anti-slavery, nonsense. It's just not accurate. Some of them did. We know the Signers' Declaration, about 1/4 were racist slave owners, and that's way too many. The others, some of the others had slaves. They freed slaves. They became anti-slavery. So on the 3/5 clause, what happened was when you got into the Constitutional Convention, at that point in time, they said, the Constitution said for every 30,000 inhabitants in your state, you get to have a representative of Congress. And so, particularly Georgia and South Carolina, who had more blacks than whites in the state, said, we love this. We're going to count all the slaves we got in the state, and for every 30,000 slaves, we get another pro-slavery guy to Congress. Well, the guys up north said, no, you can count anyone who's free, and if you want more representative Congress, free all your slaves like we have. And they said, you don't tell us what to do. We have slavery. And so they went back and I love it. The guys up north said, you guys in the South say that your slaves are your property. Here's what we're doing. Up north, we're going to count all of our horses and all of our chairs and all of our tables. And for every 30,000 pieces of property, we get another anti-slavery. And the South said, you can't do it. So what they agreed on was that in that area, you had to have 50,000 inhabitants before you could have a representative. That's the 3/5 clause. You only get to count 3/5 of the slaves that are there. You're not saying slaves are 3/5 of a person. That was an anti-slavery clause added to the Constitution.
And yet it's twisted to be just the opposite.
Well, Frederick Douglass, who's a minister, but he's a civil rights leader, he was taught that the Constitution was pro-slavery with the 3/5 clause. And he used to speak for the New York Abolition Society, and then he was hired by the Massachusetts. And he said, before I go speak, and I'm getting paid for this, I really ought to read the Constitution myself. He said, when I read it, he said, I found that every clause was an anti-slavery clause. He said the characterization of the Constitution to me had been wrong. In the 3/5 clause, he saw it as an anti-slavery clause, which is what it is. Today, people hear 3/5. They're only 3/5 of the person. No, you only get to count 3/5 of the slave population so that you can have less pro-slavery representatives in Congress. It's an anti-slavery provision.
Man, I bet you that there's people watching this that are just shocked by the things you're saying. But anyway,
well, I hope they go look it up and check it, because the facts are there.
But this is the reason we're bringing this out, is because, man, people today are trashing our nation, and by doing that, it basically is loosing the bonds that we have to our founding fathers and all of this, and it frees us to just go in a totally different direction.
There's no question. America's got warts on its nose.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's got less warts on its nose than any other nation. And the warts on our nose, we work really hard to get rid of.
But people are trashing our history in order to say
right.
that we need to go in a different direction. And I tell you, we've got a godly heritage that we need to honor the Constitution, and we need to get involved. So again, I want to encourage you, we're out of time today, but I want to encourage you to go to wallbuilders.com. David Barton is just a huge resource. And I've seen, I don't know how many, but dozens of his DVDs, and they are excellent. And he presents it in such a way that there really is no argument against what he's saying if you believe the facts and don't have a prejudice when you listen to it.
If you like truth.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we'd encourage you to go to wallbuilders.com with David Barton. Also, if you need prayer for anything, if we've stirred you up, and if somehow or another you say, man, would you pray with me? I've had some wrong concepts and I need to change some things. We've got people standing by, 719-635-1111. You can chat. We'll still have people chatting with you after this is over, so please go there. Check it out. Again, you can give if you want to go to our website and click on the Give button, or you can call our helpline and do that. But we want to encourage you to get involved. That's what we've been talking about. So anyway, thanks for being with us tonight. Thank you for joining me, David. You've been a blessing. And man, I praise God for this man. He's standing up against all of the ungodliness that is trying to rewrite our nation's history and therefore undo the moral foundations that we have.
Thanks, brother.
And praise God, I believe together we're making a difference.
Thanks for having a backbone. Appreciate you saying that, brother.
Well, anyway, we're glad that you're with us. Remember, we'll be back next Tuesday. I'm going to be here next Tuesday. I'm home for a while, so I hope you join me. And we're going to be doing another live Tuesday Bible study at 6 p.m. Mountain Time every Tuesday night. God bless you.
Sometimes a gift.
Once upon a time, many years ago, in the ancient land of Persia,
Can change your life forever.
Oh, come thou day spring, come and cheer.
I'll be home for Christmas. I found my King. His love reached out to me. He spoke